Certainly. Here's section 1 of the story, minimum 700 words, titled ### Section 1, Ashes of Arrogance. They came in ships that blackened the skies, blocking out the stars our ancestors once whispered to. The Varrock, gleaming, proud, and ancient in their own reckoning, descended upon a fractured earth with the arrogance of gods. They claimed to be the pinnacle of progress, to bring order to what they saw as a crumbling, regressed species. To them, we were nothing but remnants, scavengers and cave dwellers eking out a pitiful existence among rusted ruins and overgrown monuments. They called us primitive. They did not see what lay beneath the surface, in our bones, in our blood. What they saw as chaos was resilience. What they labeled ignorance was adaptation. What they mocked as regression was our rebirth. The world had changed long before the Varrock arrived. Humanity had risen high once. Skyscrapers scraping heavens, machines singing across continents, data flowing like rivers. But it all fell. The Great Collapse wasn't a single event, but a cascade. Climate disasters, wars over vanishing resources, artificial minds turning cold and unyielding, and finally the burn, the solar flares that erased every satellite and silenced our sky. When it ended, the survivors didn't rebuild. They adapted. They listened to the rhythms of the earth, the memory of roots and winds. They learned to live with less, not out of choice, but out of necessity. What remained were not nations, but clans, tribes, circles. They didn't worship machines. They remembered their failure. Kalroth was one such place. Tucked between jagged cliffs and thick pine forests, its people wore furs, carved tools from stone and bone, and passed wisdom by story, not screen. To outsiders, it looked like a step backward. But within Kolroda's silence was the echo of survival. Nael was born under a blood moon, the night the northern valley caught fire. His father was a hunter, his mother a weaver. From a young age, Nael knew silence, not just a silence of speech, but a breath of presence, of movement. He could walk among wolves without startling them. He could read the wind like words. When the first Varrock ship broke through the atmosphere, a pillar of flame in the sky, Kolroda's elders gathered in the stone hall. They spoke not with panic, but with purpose. This was not the first threat humanity had faced, but it was the most alien. The Varrock came not with diplomacy, but with mandates. They declared Earth a quarantine zone. They claimed they were here to uplift what remained. They deployed machines to scan, catalog, and correct. Villages like Kalroth were labeled zones of stunted development. Their traditions were deemed inefficient, their tools barbaric. Nael saw them first on the high ridge, tall, sinewy creatures of synthetic flesh and gleaming armor. They walked like kings through the forest, stepping on roots and flowers alike. Their drones hovered overhead, mapping the land like prey trails. But Kalroth was no simple prey. The Varrock captured 3 young men from the edge of the valley. They claimed it was for re-education. A week later, their bodies were returned. Cold, clean, sterile. Not a mark of violence. But every soul in Kalroth could feel what had been taken. Spirit, fire, essence, ***. Nael's father went to forest that night and never returned. Some said he tried to infiltrate the Varrock encampment. Others believed he wanted to die on his own terms, not as some subject in an alien ledger. Either way, Nael watched his mother stitch his father's old cloak into his own shoulders, and the silence between them became something deeper, an understanding. This was not the time to beg, not the time to surrender. It was the time to remember what it meant to be human. The elders began teaching the children the old paths again, how to walk without sound, how to speak through signs, how to vanish into stone and shadow. They gathered herbs that masked scent, mosses that cooled the skin from thermal scans, insects that devoured metal. Nael, now 17, took to the forests each night. He studied the way the drones circled. He watched the patterns of the Varrock patrols. He saw how they didn't look down at the earth as they walked, only forward, as if nothing beneath them mattered. That was their first mistake. When he returned to the village one morning, he held up a piece of Varrock armor, broken, dented, bloodied. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was clear. They may call us primitive, but we remember how to hunt. ***. Let me know when you're ready for Section 2, Fires in the Bone F, or if you like this part adapted into a cinematic video script F. Absolutely. Here's Section 2 of the story, continuing from Section 1, titled ## Section 2, Fires in the Bone. Nail stood under the stars, the broken Varric armor piece, still warm from the previous night's skirmish. The village gathered around him in the dim glow of firelight, not in awe, but in readiness. The time for hiding had passed. The time for remembering had begun. The elders of Kalroth, once keepers of stories, became strategists. Their minds, shaped by decades of scarcity and struggle, now plotted resistance not with machines or codes, but with intuition, terrain, and tradition. They didn't need satellites to track the enemy. The trees whispered, the birds signaled, and the rivers carried secrets if one knew how to listen. Nail knelt beside Elder Sari, a woman who had seen the world before the fall. Her sight was gone, but her memory held a map of every ridge, cave, and current in the valley. You do not defeat them by becoming them, she said. You defeat them by remembering who you are. Nail nodded, understanding not just her words, but their weight. From that moment on, Kalroth shifted from settlement to ambush site. The huts were disguised with bark and branches, heat signatures suppressed with thick layers of river mud and moss. Hunting trails were reconfigured into mazes. Pits were dug, not to trap animals, but to mislead machines. Women forged barbs from old bone, poisoned with venom milked from cliff-dwelling spiders. Children became lookouts, their games restructured as drills. Who could vanish the fastest, who could mimic forest sounds, who could spot a drone before it passed overhead. Even the animals, raised alongside the villagers, were trained to recognize the Varric scent, high, synthetic, and unnatural. But above all, it was the silence that defined Kalroth, not the silence of fear, but of intent. Every villager moved with purpose. Every glance held meaning. They were not fighting to reclaim the old world. They were fighting to protect the only one that mattered. The Varric, meanwhile, interpreted the stillness as weakness. Their arrogance, rooted in thousands of years of conquest, blinded them. They had conquered galaxies with technology, but in Kalroth, their tech failed to comprehend will. After their scout failed to return, they dispatched a small strike team of 10. They moved with confidence, armed with plasma rifles and wrapped in light-bending armor. They didn't see the barbed vines guiding them off-trail. They didn't hear the birds go silent or smell the moss that masked the nearby cave entrance. They didn't feel the eyes watching them from beneath the roots. Nail led the ambush personally. With 4 others, he dropped silently from the trees. There were no loud cries, no dramatic charges, just coordinated, efficient strikes. They disabled the Varric comms with pitch-black tar made from crushed stone berries. One rifle misfired, backfiring into its user's arm. By the time the Varric reached for their emergency beacon, it was gone, cut from the device and swallowed by a hawk trained for just such a moment. 5 Varric died that night. 3 were left alive, disarmed, blindfolded, and sent back to their base with symbols carved into their armor, ancient glyphs meaning not yours. The Varric grew restless. What was meant to be a quick cultural correction had turned into a puzzle. Their reports were inconsistent, their readings corrupted. Their bots malfunctioned near Korota's woods. Drones returned with glitch footage, half the audio replaced by what sounded like whispering winds and laughter. Their analysts called it environmental interference. But it wasn't the environment, it was design. Nail and the hunters understood more than survival now. They understood disruption. Their weapons were not only made of stone and bone, they were made of underestimation. Every move the Varric made was a thread in a net being slowly drawn shut. In the heart of the forest, Korota's people began building something they hadn't built in years. A fire tower. Not to call for help, but to signal. Not to other humans, but to the Varric. Come find us, it would say. We are not afraid. The elders lit the first flame. It burned blue and green, colors made from minerals long forgotten by the galaxy, but still remembered by the Earth. The smoke rose high, curling to the branches like a serpent, and the Varric saw it. They called in reinforcements. Nail smiled. This was not a rebellion. It was not a war. It was a lesson, a return, a reminder. They called us primitive, but the fire in our bones burns older than their stars. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3, The Wounds of Earth F, or if you like this story adapted into AHFY short film script F. Absolutely. Here's Section 3 of the story with a minimum of 700 words, titled ## Section 3, The Wounds of Earth. The Varric did not retreat. They doubled down. To them, Kalroth was no longer a minor anomaly. It had become an insult to their authority, a blemish on their perfect campaign of civilization. Reinforcements came in sleek dropships, machines with wings of folded steel, and minds filled with cold logic. They brought terrain sterilizers, war beast bred in pressure chambers, and squads of enforcers trained in subjugation protocols across 100 planets. And yet, they were still at a disadvantage, because they had entered a living memory, a forest that remembered, a planet that still bled from the wounds humanity once carved into it, and a people who had learned from every scar, every fire, every fall. The first thing the Varric attempted was dominance through destruction. They deployed their atmosphere disruptors, machines that heated the air, drained moisture from plants, and silenced insect life to flush out hiding prey. But Kuroda's forests were not passive. The trees grew over tech that was left too long. Roots cracked metal, moss-covered heat vents. Even birds, trained by generations of watchers, attacked sensors in a coordinated flutter of wings and beaks. Still, the machines marched. Nail watched them from the cliff shadows. His eyes were not just human anymore, they were honed, sharpened. He could track soundless drones by the way animals shifted. He could feel vibrations in the soil. The land spoke to him, and he listened. Kuroda's people had never believed in gods, not after what the old world had done. But they believed in the earth, in its fury, its patience, its quiet vengeance. Nail led the fire born deeper into forgotten paths. Passages carved by wind and stone, marked only by the color of lichen and the bend of trees. They mapped the movement of Varric squads, not with tech, but by memory and the rhythms of sound. When the frogs stopped croaking, when the birds resumed, when the silence fell like a blanket. Then they struck, not to destroy, but to disrupt. One night, they raided a supply drop. No bloodshed, just stolen rations replaced with poisonous roots that mimicked food packs. On another, they redirected a drone swarm using reflective leaves hung on high branches, sending it into a ravine. They created phantom villages, false trails, fake fires, mannequins made from scarecrows and bones, drawing the enemy further and further from their goal. Each encounter taught Nail something new. How Varric machines respond to fire, how long it took their armor to adjust to mud, how they dealt with the cold. Nail tested everything, and slowly, the Varric began to fray. Their machines, so perfect in theory, began to fail under the pressure of unpredictability. Their soldiers grew tired, unsure, disturbed by the forest that never echoed their commands back. Some began refusing to patrol alone. Some reported being watched, feeling followed, and dreams filled with human eyes staring from the dark. Then came the turning point. A Varric squad, 12 elite warriors, disappeared entirely during a night march. Not a single trace. Just a sigil burned into a nearby tree, an ancient human rune meaning, "You are lost." The Varric leaders reacted with fury. They unleashed their war beasts, massive creatures armored with steel and controlled by neural implants. Designed to crush resistance, they charged into forests like engines of annihilation. But Kalroth had prepared for that too. Nail and his hunters lured them toward the wetland traps, where the mud ran deep and the air turned poisonous. The beasts thrashed and howled, sinking, drowning not just in mire, but in the collective defiance of a species that refused to die. Still, not all victories came without cost. Nail lost 2 of his closest warriors, Terran, the quiet spearmaker, and Juza, who sang lullabies while weaving fish traps. Their bodies were never recovered, swallowed by the land in the chaos of battle. At the fire that night, Nail spoke for the first time in days. They died not as warriors, but as guardians. The forest takes them back. Their names will never be forgotten. Their breath still lingers in the leaves. Kalroth mourned as it had always mourned, in silence, then in song. The children drew their names in ash on cave walls. The elders added their stories to the great memory, a tapestry of tales carved into stone. Their loss was not weakness. It was fuel, and the Varric, despite their numbers and their weapons, had no such memory, no ritual, no root in the world beneath them. They walked on it like it was nothing, but Earth remembered, and it did not forgive. By the third month, the Varric command declared Kalroth an anomalous resistance zone and issued a directive to flatten the region entirely. But they were too late. The forest had changed. The people had vanished. The earth had closed around them. And every step they took forward was through a trap older than their species. The battle was no longer between species or armies. It was between pride and presence, between arrogance and instinct. And the wounds of Earth, long scabbed over, were opening once again, this time to bleed as invaders dry. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4. They left in silence, F. Or if you want all 4 sections compiled into a printable PDF or narrated script, F. Absolutely. Here's Section 4, the final chapter of the story, with a minimum of 700 words, titled ## Section 4. They left in silence. The Varric fleet hovered like ghosts above the canopy, vast shadows swallowing the sun. What had begun as a civilizing initiative had turned into a humiliation. Resources had been expended, soldiers lost, equipment sabotaged, protocols shattered, and all by a group they still struggled to classify. Primitive. Their reports repeated, but the term was losing meaning. For all their sensors, maps, and machines, the Varric couldn't predict the humans of Kalroth. They couldn't break them. They couldn't even find them now. Entire valleys once mapped and marked had disappeared beneath cunning disguises. Rivers rerouted, trails erased, heat signatures nullified with frozen mud and plant extracts. It wasn't magic. It was mastery. Commanders argued on the mothership, some demanding orbital bombardment, others fearing retribution or escalation. The species is contained, one insisted. This tribe is insignificant, said another. But fear had crept into their language, into their decisions. Reports of whispers in the dark, eyes in the mist, and dreams of fire were spreading among the lower ranks. Dreams. These creatures were causing dreams. Nail watched them from the edge of a blackened cliff, where once a Varric dropship had scorched the earth to ash. Now, new green shoots poked through the cracks. Life didn't wait for victories. It simply returned. The Fireborn no longer needed to fight. Their war had become something deeper, psychological, spiritual. The Varric feared the land now. They feared the quiet. Even their most hardened units walked with caution. Their tower and machines scanned shadows, unsure what might be lurking in the dark hollows of the trees. One morning, without warning, the skies filled with thunder, but no fire fell. No soldiers marched. No commands echoed through the forest. The Varric were leaving. It happened slowly, methodically, as if trying to mass retreat as regulation. Dropships collected fractured units. Drones were recalled. Equipment was abandoned or destroyed on the spot. What they couldn't carry, they buried. They left no messages, no promises to return. Just a final withdrawal. Silent, humbling, defeated. Nail stood beneath the fading roar of their engines and did not smile. He did not cheer. Kuroda's people had no victory rituals for driving invaders away. That would have meant they'd expected to be invaded again. No, what they had was something else. Continuity. The world kept spinning. The fires kept burning. The stories continued, unbroken. The children watched the ships rise and vanish into the sky, like falling stars in reverse. One boy asked if they would come back. Nail simply said, "Not if they remember." And so, life resumed, not as it had before, but as it always did, by adapting. Kalroth rebuilt, not in the way cities once did, but in harmony with what remained. The caves were cleaned, and their walls updated with new carvings. The fire tower stayed, but its flame was doused. It would not be needed again, not yet. Bones of Varric machines were repurposed. Blades reforged, armor melted into cooking pots and tools. Their technology was not rejected, but reclaimed, Because survival wasn't about isolation. It was about knowing what to keep and what to let die. Years passed. Children became hunters. Elders became stories. Nail aged slowly, a man both feared and revered. Some said he could speak to animals. Others believed he could see through walls. The truth was simpler. He listened. He observed. He remembered. When his time came, Nail walked alone into the deep valley, wearing his father's cloak and carrying the same stone blade from his first raid. He left no body, no grave, only a trail of carved symbols in the bark, ending at a river bend shaped like a crescent moon. And in Calroth, they added his name to the stone of the returned. But the story didn't end there. Decades later, another species passed near Earth. Scanners detected signs of life, low-tech, non-industrial, organic. Reports labeled the planet recovering and noted limited threat potential. A junior scout requested permission to observe the surface. Command refused. The record showed a previous expedition had ended in confusion and loss. The file was short, redacted, but the final note was clear. Leave Earth be. They survive. They are not what they seem. They called us primitive. We called it survival. Now we call it home. Let me know if you like this entire story turned into A PDF book layout F, a voiceover video script F, or a Reddit HFY post version F.